The Institute for Faith and Freedom at Grove City College presents Liberty Mail with the Student Fellows of Faith and Freedom.
Welcome back to Liberty Mail. This is Libby Krieger.
And Aaron Jenks.
And we're coming to you live, broadcasting from the Institute for Faith and Freedom's annual conference, kicking off this morning. We're super excited. We're here in one of the academic buildings in Grove City College's campus. And so we just want to talk a little bit first about the conference. Tonight, we will be having keynote speaker Michael Knowles come. I know we've been talking about that for a few weeks now, but we have Thursday and Friday. Today it's Thursday morning. We have speakers all spread about through the days, and they have a lot of different areas of expertise. So you're really getting a full understanding of limited government, economics, and all of that.
Yeah, it's amazing. We have Jay Koss, who earlier came into Grove City and gave a talk on Jefferson
James Madison,
and Madison.
Yes.
And then we have even like Bert Folsom. We have Fuller and Rittenauer. Those are Grove City natives.
Economic professors,
and
yes,
then
that'll be great.
These are all today, and then on Friday, tomorrow, we have Paul Kangor, and we even have Lenny McAllister, which is really
School
going to be great.
choice, he's really great on that. So yeah, you're really getting a lot of these different topics, and so we're excited to have a lot of people, maybe some people who have watched our show and actually meet them in person. So a lot of good stuff coming up these next 2 days, but we will be busy. But let's just jump straight into, we actually have 2 wins today because we wanted to talk about the conference a little bit first. Didn't want to take up too much time with more wins. But first of all, so we have this game of politics that we're kind of seeing in the House with the defund the police issue. And so just to give you a little background on what's happening there, Republican North Carolina Representative Greg Murphy is introducing a resolution basically saying that if you have openly supported defunding the police, you cannot have your private security paid for by taxpayers. And so I think it's a game of politics because, yes, it's almost kind of funny, but it's really true when you get to the crux of the issue that you're having Americans in major cities and just all across the country having to deal with rising crime, with less police, and it's becoming a real issue, who have politicians advocating to defund the police, making them less safe, but they're having their own private security at the same time. It's kind of a...
Yeah, as you said, like, it's kind of like a gotcha and like a joke and comical in that fact, but then it's also very legitimate as leftist senators or representatives, like specifically the squad, spent thousands of dollars on private security that are donated to their campaigns and not supposed to be allocated towards that, while they are simultaneously calling for defunding the security of citizens around the country. And so it's a very legitimate argument that, okay, if you're going to make these arguments on a national scale, don't be turn around and then doing the opposite and paying for your own security. It's a very common thread.
Well, and it's taxpayers
and
paying
very
for
elitist
it
too.
Yeah, I was just going to say that.
For thee, not for me. And so it's upsetting as a common individual. And then a great job for North Carolina Representative Greg Murphy for introducing this bill, and it's got co-signed by like 7 other representatives. Yeah.
Well, also when you look at the representatives who are actually, and the senators, really promulgating this narrative of defunding the police, the police are out to get you, they're representing majorly urban areas in which crime is mostly on the rise, where it's harder to recruit police and police are not having enough resources to actually combat the crime. And we really haven't seen, that's a whole other issue, but a ton of evidence of a systemic policing bias. But it's just like you said, like such elitism that I'm important enough. I need my own private security, and you're going to pay for it. But you'll be fine. The police are out to get you, so we don't want police for you.
And then there's a high level of hypocrisy within it, and I know that's like specifically why this senator, Greg Murphy was talking about this, like the hypocrisy of the progressives. But then I also think about this. It's so wild to think that, okay, President Joe Biden sits on a stage in the White House and says, no, we're not for defunding the police. But
they try to walk it back.
Yes, they walk it back, and then even CNN or MSNBC, they say, no, we never supported defunding the police because they understand that it is so wildly unpopular in the states. But then at the same time, you still have the far left progressive squad saying, no, we really want this, but as I said, not for me.
Well, it seems like the progressives, like the squad, like we're talking about, actually maybe believe that to some extent because they're sticking with it whenever you're seeing the Democratic establishment walking that back. And so I think is happening funny. You know, they're sticking up their hand in the wind, seeing where the wind is blowing. They're like, oh, this is actually not quite as popular as we thought, especially come midterms. So we're going to walk this back, and we're going to say that we never actually stood for this, because they also know the media is not going to hold them to account and be like, actually, here are the receipts. Besides some conservative media outlets, the largely mainstream media, the legacy media, will just cover for them and basically be the Democrats' communication team. And just say, like, yeah, they never actually said that. Fact check, mostly true, and it's going to be really nuanced. But if you actually look at the details, they did 100% stand for defunding the police.
Yeah, they'll never admit, like, the news organizations organizations will never admit that or support that narrative behind the people that they think are so famous and they're they're superstars within the politics.
Exactly.
I also think it's so crazy that, okay, they're using this taxpayer money for, okay, I'm going to use this for my own private security. Use it for something that you're calling, like, alarm to. Like, so the squad specifically talks about all these disadvantaged communities, and there's really horrible instances happening in, like, New York City specifically for Cortez. But then use that money, that private tax money, give it back to the people. Then, if you really want to stand on what you're speaking and walk the talk, do that.
Yeah, and obviously this is not. Hypocrisy in politicians is not anything new. There's nothing new under the sun. And you see it from conservatives, too, from time to time. But on this issue especially, I think it's good that they're being held to account, even if it is more something that might not actually get passed. Maybe it'd pass one house but not the other, and who knows what will happen after midterms. But I just think this is a great thing that they're actually using political power in which they have whatever they can do to make a statement, to bring this to attention, and not just always sit there as the principled losers, but actually try to do something and use that power to their advantage.
Well, we started this topic off as the game of politics, and I really think it's going to come back to that, like you said, after midterms or in a couple months when maybe this resolution either fails or gets passed or whatever, gets voted on, and we're going to see, okay, are some Democrats going to take party lines or how is that party line even going to divide? Are they going to say, no, we don't support defunding the police overall?
Yeah.
Or are they going to, okay, no, we're going to go a little more with this progressive side of the Democratic Party?
Yeah, that will be interesting. I mean, they've already walked back the defund the police narrative, so I wouldn't be surprised if some, I think it'd be a nuanced answer where they'd say something like, well, we never stood for defunding the police, so this is just a political game that the Republicans are playing, and I think they'd probably try to throw it back on them being petty and all of that, which, politics is a game, so you really have to play it, but unfortunately that's kind of where we're at.
Yeah, and I think we can hop right into the second, because it really kind of ties into this, okay, there's a belief from the left and how they, but if you're good, we hop into that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so this belief from the left that, okay, we have a gender pay gap in America, and when you get the statistics, you see that, okay, there is some variation between pay between men and women. Now, when you look at
what accounts for that?
Yeah, what accounts for that? Is it just a single variable problem where it's, okay, no, because you're a woman, you're not getting paid much? And I know before we said
because men are out to get you.
If that was true, there'd be thousands of lawsuits happening throughout the states.
Yeah.
But no, the conservative, at least myself, understands that it's a multivariable situation or problem. And so when we look at it, it's characteristic traits. It's what you want to do in life. It's your goals, aspirations. Even if you want to be more family oriented, and that goes for men and women.
Career path, hours worked, seniority, all of those factor in, and it's just whenever they calculate it, it's like an average, and so you really can't factor all of those into a simple average of pay.
Yeah.
And like you said, if there was actually a situation in which a woman and a man were to have the same job, put the same hours, same seniority, the same company, and there was a pay difference, that would be grounds for a discrimination suit. And that's not what's happening. It's simply an average, and you can't account for all those other factors, like you said.
And so the reason we bring this up is because there was a recent Pew research done and a polling, and this polling was going on since 2019, and it found that in 22 cities, women out-earned men. And so that was either, it would span from 101% to 115%. And so in 250 total U.S. Metropolitan areas, women, it was under the 30. So they're out-earning young men in all these cities. And specifically, which I thought was interesting, it's New York City, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, some of the biggest metros in America, younger women are out-earning young men.
Yeah. Well, if you think a few key takeaways, number one, I think obviously it's not fully conclusive, but I think it's an indicator that young women are less interested in the traditional lifestyle. They're pursuing higher paying careers, they're putting more hours into that, and they are less interested in getting married and having a family and just what used to be the more of norm. And I'm not saying fully it's a bad thing that women have careers or anything of that sort, but I think it does show you a broader indication of the culture and what we are glorifying and what we are aiming for. So I think that in itself is kind of a loss that we're seeing such a push towards career.
Yeah, it's a good point. I understand it. And to further that, there's a statistic that says never married and also childless women earn 117% on average of the male earning. And so when we look at this, let's call it like a theory of the gender pay gap or like discrimination of gender pay gap.
Yeah.
And then you come out with statistics that say the opposite. It's, okay, how do I, as a leftist, hypothetically,
Of course, yes.
how do I come to terms with these two, my belief and then this reality that I see within the data? And then, of course, like we said earlier, the news organizations are not going to promulgate this. It's not going to be in the current mainstream. So it's up to us as we do, and this is kind of our goal at Liberty Mail, is to kind of like promulgate these ideas that, okay, you can't come to terms with these two facts.
Something else I think is interesting about this is, so the study was done by the Pew Research Center, and I think, so the title is Young Women Are Out-Earning Young Men in Several U.S. Cities, but it talks about this pay gap, and even like the premise of this article is that there is a pay gap, and so you have the media and like even these well-respected research institutes acting as though that is fact already, that there is a pay gap, like a legitimate gender pay gap based systemically on sexism. Yes,
let me think about it like this. There is a pay gap, and it goes both ways. There's a pay gap within any kind of field, whatever industry, or even like based on race, there is a gap always, because you can pull data and make it say whatever you want, and there's good to be that. So then we have to really be rational about this, be like, okay, what are the underlying causes of this? And then where the person on the left, I think, strays off the path is, oh, that's solely based because you were a female in the United States. You are being discriminated against, and you cannot earn more than the male counterpart.
I guess the problem is the framing and the rhetoric of saying there is a pay gap assumes, just the way that like the media is, that it is a systemic problem and like that it doesn't account, it is solely based on those factors, I guess. Well, and another sad thing about how this has been framed, I think, is that women really believe they are being discriminated against and are getting paid less just because of their gender. I mean, it's the same kind of thing with white privilege. If you're being told that you are a nameless, faceless movement or hate is out to get you from the start, how do you think you're going to succeed if that's what you truly believe?
Yeah, it's the role of the victim. One of my favorite authors, Thomas Sowell, always talks about this in his writings as a black conservative and economist, saying that, okay, in this culture, and he's talking to his black American culture, that we've grown up in this, we are the victim, and how does that shape our ideology, how does that shape our feelings growing up? And there's a real deep level of psychology within it.
Oh, yeah.
And so, like you said, when women today are or growing up being told, okay, you're going to not earn as much as me across from the table from you growing up your whole life, how does that really affect your psychology?
Exactly. I found this really interesting article from the Manhattan Institute, which is a well-respected think tank, and talking about the gender wage gap being a myth. And it was really funny because it was quoting President Obama. Okay. And back whenever he was in office, he would talk about making progress on the 77 cents to a dollar notion of women being paid less. But they like fact-checked him, and obviously it's not taking into account those factors. But even if you look at his White House staff, women were being paid, if you use the same sort of average kind of calculation that the left does to get that 77 cents on a dollar, he was paying women 91 cents to the male. So it's just funny. It's like, do you even look in the mirror before you make these claims?
Another hypocritical kind of statement from the elitist establishment we kind of view in our...
But it shouldn't take a research institute or a think tank to come up with that, you know? That should be something that journalists are actually looking to find out. But, you know, that's not where we're at, because you know how the media is, so...
And one kind of like cementing fact that in this Pew Research is that the vast majority, where kind of how they viewed the cities and the gender pay gap in all of this, is that it was drastically narrower compared to like 10 years ago,
Yeah.
or any kind of older statistic looking at the differences in pay. And even like majority of the time it was women, if it wasn't in the 22 where they were out earning young men, it was, okay, they're right at that 95 percentile. And I think like 49% of all women fell into that. And then if you got anywhere below 80, it was only like 3 or 4% of all women fell into that, okay, women earn 80% of what the 100% of what males make to their counterpart. And it's just crazy how like narrow this is, but it's such an important subject from the left.
Yeah, and again, I think that just goes to show that women are moving less towards having families and pursuing the traditional lifestyle, and more towards career, working those long hours in those high-paying fields, which again, not necessarily a bad thing, but I think culturally that is not a good shift. Because, I mean, don't we have a replacement rate that is too low? Like, we are below that point already. So what you're going to see is that getting worse and worse and worse.
Yeah, and we can keep on throwing multiple variables at the situation. It just keeps on showing how
complex the issue is, and how we can't explain it with one factor.
Is that women work like 2 or 4 hours less than their male counterpart on average, and it's in this research. Please look it up, pewresearch.com or .org, and it just shows that, okay, like you said, it's so complex, and it's going to be a multivariable issue, and it's not going to be simplified down into this progressive narrative of, okay, no, they're out to get you, you're a victim. Sorry, Libby, you can't make more.
I know, just the men are out to get us women. Yeah, but interesting topic for sure, and I like how you brought this in to the conversation as well, that's the leftist thinks that, but even if this were true, you're getting proved wrong.
There's a ton of buzz going around. I hope y'all can hear this in this atrium and at Grove City for the Freedom Conference. I think we're going to wrap up shortly here because there's going to be speakers, as we said, all day. I know, Libby, who are you introducing later?
Dr. Jay Cost, right after this, actually. He's starting us off on the conference. I believe he's talking about constitutionalism and republicanism and how those two intersect in American politics. So that will be a really interesting talk. Again, Michael Knowles tonight is going to be really exciting. And I think he's speaking on free speech. And that's something that we have talked about so much and have always had slight disagreements on what exactly free speech means. And so I think we're gonna have an interesting conversation after hearing Michael Knowles tonight. I think that will be live streamed through Young America's Foundation.
Absolutely will be.
Yeah, so make sure you check that out.
It's going to be exciting 2 days. Please be on the IFF Instagram, be on the IFF YouTube account, Facebook. Look out for Liberty Mail coming out this weekend. And we appreciate y'all listening. Thank you.
Bye. Welcome back to Liberty Mail. This is Libby Krieger.
And this is Grace Riley.
And we're coming to you live from the annual Faith and Freedom Conference here at Grove City College. We're here in the atrium of one of the academic buildings. You all have gotten to know Grace Riley from a few past episodes, and today we're just going to have a natural kind of flow of conversation on the war on women.
Yeah, and I'm really happy to be here. It's a great conference and a lot of people on campus today for it.
Really exciting. And I figured this is a great conversation for us to have as two young conservative women. You know, we see the role of gender maybe very differently than a lot of other young women at this time because we know how feminism has really kind of taken over and become a lot more radical than it originally started as. So where we could start off today, I guess, is how gender roles and how women have been like pushed into the workforce a little more. I know we talked about that before going live, but just how no longer is there a traditional route or a push towards that traditional route. You know, Western civilization has flourished for so long based on the nuclear family. And that requires, to at least some extent, an understanding that women and men have different roles. And that's not to say that women can't have careers or women can't be successful or anything like that. I think it's really more just the broader cultural shift towards pushing women to just be workers all the time and not and kind of deny the aspect that we were created to be mothers and wives too.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly said, and it's really important to acknowledge that we're seeing this everywhere throughout culture, in government, in politics, in schools, and just everywhere, this, what I would call a war on gender. And we have seen this, a war on gender, a war on women.
A war on truth, really.
Yeah, a war on truth, you're right, because just at its very core, men and women are different, and that's really great. It's a good thing. And men and women both have different gifts. They bring different qualities and skill sets to the table that help to balance society, our families, our relationships. And those are things and differences that should be celebrated. And again, are so important in that core family, which is the core, you know, of our good American country. And it's so interesting to see the way that culture has changed over the past few years. So we see in the recent Supreme Court cases, we see Judge Ketanji Brown, like we see her not defined woman. And then we see in schools, we see people pushing sex education on kindergartners and elementary school kids, all to kind of confuse them and say, here, what's your sexuality? What are your pronouns? What's this, that? And to kind of erase the definition of gender at its core, and then the concept that has been, you know, known for years. Like, it's a pretty simple thing. You're either a man or a woman. That's a scientific concept, but that's one that the radical left has been trying to erase for years, and I think we're really seeing it in play now. And another thing is we see that in Hollywood and in culture, all over the place. You can barely find a show today that doesn't focus on this topic.
No, that's a good point. And I think there's so many areas in which we could talk about this war on women, where whether it's transgenderism or with careers or just radical feminism writ large. You can see it cutting against like what women are made to be. And so it's just really, we could take this in so many different directions from that. But even like when you think of the leftist term, I actually looked up articles on the war on women before us having this conversation, and a lot of it was about reproductive rights and how they framed that issue as the war on women is this crusade to overturn Roe, because that is truly how women can have rights in this country.
And be empowered in this country.
Exactly.
Abortion is just true women empowerment. That's what they say. And that's a lie.
And it's really the opposite when you think about it, because that all stemmed from the sexual revolution, which I think a lot of this radical feminism really kind of spiraled. Just telling women, you know, this is how you can empower yourself, is by going around and really just not acting in an upstanding way. I won't get into details, obviously, on the podcast, but just like what naturally flowed from the sexual revolution is where we are now. Just saying women can do whatever they want with no regard for the fact that we are human beings with a soul too, and like the metaphysical level of this as well.
Yeah, and I think, like, as you're saying, it really does have a Marxist core where, you know, Marx stands for the abolition of the nuclear family.
Exactly.
And with that involves removing women from the home and sending them into the workforce, because in a Marxist society, Marx doesn't want kids to be parented by their parents. He doesn't want that core nuclear family.
The state needs to do that, yeah.
Exactly.
So abolish the family, and that's one step closer.
Exactly. So you move kids into the school systems, where now the public school systems are pushing radical leftist ideologies onto kids throughout our American public schools. So the education system has largely fallen to the left, which is something I think conservatives really need to be focused more on.
We've lost the institutions, truly.
Exactly.
And I guess so a question to go off of this that we could talk about is what it actually means to be a conservative woman in this day and age, how we can live that out, and just kind of steps for maybe other young conservative women who are watching this podcast.
Yeah, so I would say that the core to this question and the core to answering this question is to, you know, live your life in the lifestyle of conservatism, standing for your values. So live your life in that way and be a good mom. You know, be a good woman, be a good wife, be a good mom in your family, and raise a good next generation. That's really the core, I think, is just living out these principles.
Yeah, and we talk about conservatism, and it's what values are you conserving? So we talk about faith and freedom, and I think those are Institute for Faith and Freedom, but those are really at the heart of what conservatism is. And so I think also, in my opinion, just even though like us as conservative women who are not married and are still young and we have a career path of some sort, that's not a bad thing to have a career. I think lots of times the left looks at conservative women and they're like, oh, well, you just want them to stay at home and be in the kitchen. That's not what we're saying. You know, there is an area, there is a place to have careers and to use your God-given talents to better help human flourishing or whatever it may be. But I think at the end we still should be pursuing that traditional lifestyle that is, at the end of the day, that's what makes people happy, and that's what is better for Western civilization and writ large conservatism.
Well, it's true, and we talk about happiness, and really conservatives statistically are more happy, and I think that's a great point too, where women have the unique ability, role, and gift to be mothers, and that's, I think, the most important role a woman could have, but also women obviously are given qualities to be able to work hard, pursue successful careers, and do both while still conserving those roles. So I think that's a really important gift where, it's amazing that here in America we can kind of have it all. It's just remembering those core values and
what is
sticking
more
to
important
them.
At the end of the day,
Exactly, and prioritizing, because I know, again, it's like there's a lot of career women today, and there's nothing wrong with that if that's what someone chooses to be their path, but there's definitely something to be said for those traditional roles and having that balance in our society.
Yeah, exactly. And another interesting thing is the left, they say they support women, and what that really means is they support killing children in a lot of ways.
Which makes no sense.
Yeah, it makes no sense. But at the same time, they support transgenderism too, which means that there is no difference between men and women. And you really can't have your cake and eat it too. Either there is a difference between men and women are really special, like feminism may say, and I agree with that in that statement, or there's no difference and the genders and sexes are malleable, and you can switch between the two. And so it's so interesting that both of these leftist talking points and movements really cut against each other when you get to the heart of the premises of the movement itself.
Yeah, and there are very thorough inconsistencies, as you're saying. And off of the topic of abortion, too, that is really one of the biggest lies that I think women are being told these days. It's that abortion is empowerment. And, you can't have a baby and a career. You have to have abortions. Abortions are great. And that is the messaging that the abortion movement is using. Not that, there's one if you need it. It's gone from, the heartbeat debates to a California bill that just came up where they're trying to legalize aborting your baby 7 days after it was born. So infanticide. So we've moved past these simple heartbeat bills and past, here's an abortion if you're in an emergency situation, to, have as much sex as you want and glorifying getting abortions after that.
Anything goes, basically.
And that goes off, and that goes off of the sexual revolution, as you said, and it goes into kind of transforming this whole culture and breaking down the nuclear family.
Well, also, so you and I were both at the Dobbs case at the Supreme Court this past January, I believe, or was it December? It was sometime in the winter. We were down in D.C.
I believe December.
and you would see just the discrepancy between the two sides, the women on the pro-life side and the women on the pro-choice side. It wasn't even pro-choice. That was pro-murder, and the way that they were acting and the way that they were putting on a show of taking abortion pills, dressing in all black, yelling vulgar things, and you could see just the huge discrepancy of what these two sides stand for. It's not about freedom. It's not about promoting women in any way. It's about murder and completely licensed to live an immoral life and have no repercussions and feel no pushback on that. Because I think at the heart of it, they feel probably guilty about the way they're living and maybe what they've done in the past, and they have to normalize it so much so they don't feel any of that guilt.
And it's truly a sad thing. And, watching those discrepancies at that case, you really can see them. The pro-life women are women of empathy and who are of love and standing for life and for those values, whereas the other side is just standing completely against that and is angry, honestly, and unhappy, and that shows. And, again, there have been statistics that radical feminists today are way more unhappy than conservative feminist women that are more traditional. And, it's just the truth of what makes people happy and what doesn't. And we've seen this throughout history with the family as the core versus people kind of struggling alone, trying to depend only on the state, looking for cultural guidance instead of spiritual guidance.
Yeah, exactly. And Grace, I don't know if you saw this one video was going around Twitter the other day about Cracker Jill. I don't know if you saw that. The Take Me Out to the Ball Game song, how it's Buy Me Some Peanuts and Cracker Jacks. There's a rebranding by Cracker Jacks to be Cracker Jills now, and so then they
Because
put
we
out,
have to do that with every brand
and
now.
personally,
Yeah.
I feel so much better knowing that Cracker Jacks are not Cracker Jills. As a woman, you know,
I
you
know.
feel represented. Just kidding, of course.
It
But
just, it validates me as a woman.
yeah, absolutely. Couldn't eat Cracker Jacks before that. But so this video, they had a little promo of this lady singing the "Take Me Out to the Ball Game," but saying Cracker Jills instead, and it was like support women. Like it was supposed to be this huge feminist thing, but I think it was so ironic. I almost thought it was satire to have this coming out at the same time as this Leah Thomas stuff. And obviously, I'm not saying the one was a reaction to the other. I don't think they were related, but that it's the blatant hypocrisy of the left that you're seeing kind of promoting these two things at once. How can you be promoting Cracker Jills and be like women's sports, like women's rights, all this stuff, while also completely pushing women to the side by allowing men to compete against them and just obliterate them in these races?
Yeah, and men competing in women's sports is really at the core of the attack on women. Because as a former athlete myself, so I actually competed in high school track in Connecticut, which was, I don't know if anyone remembers, but that's where all of this started. So that's where during Connecticut track state championships,
I didn't know
a
that.
man was able to compete and take basically a spot from a woman. That's where a lot of this national coverage started. So I was an athlete there, and now I'm not that good, but the point is I understand as a female athlete how difficult
How
and
much work
hard
you
that
put
is.
in, too,
Yeah,
just
and
to be
this,
completely
it's a
pushed
lot
aside.
bigger than just, oh, I won or lost a championship. These are scholarships for these high schoolers, at least, that they're missing out on, and they're missing out on spots to higher championships that get them scouts and scholarships. It's a really big deal, and again, something like that is so important for women's empowerment, and for the left to be supporting just kind of throwing that away is so inconsistent with what they say they stand for in other situations.
Exactly. It's like they have two competing narratives that they've pushed both of them separately so hard that their cognitive dissonance won't allow them to see the direct kind of way that they can't work together. So it's really fascinating to see as and someone who doesn't support that movement and the narrative, all of that, how much they just don't make sense together. And I think any thinking, common sense person can see that. And I think we're actually seeing more a return to
more
common sense.
people are waking up to that,
I agree.
especially female athletes are waking up to that and kind of seeing, wait,
The left actually doesn't care about me.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe even female athletes that were formerly on the left, like they're opening their eyes and saying, wait, this doesn't really make sense. Because again, as far as sports goes, there are biological differences. And as far as the gender definitions go to their core, again, biological differences. But in sports, that put men at an advantage, and that's a fact. And you can't change the facts, even though the left may think that you can. You can't.
Exactly.
So,
Facts are facts. Facts don't care about your feelings,
Exactly.
as Ben Shapiro once said. But yeah, so great conversation today. It's nice to talk about being conservative women. Obviously, none of us can live it out perfectly, too, as Christians and as conservatives, but we should strive
Yeah,
to
certainly
promote
something to
those values.
strive for.
Yeah, and actually live out faith and freedom in our daily lives.
and it's the best thing we can do as conservative women.
Exactly. So if you're listening to this podcast on YouTube, make sure you hit subscribe, hit the bell so you're notified. Thanks, Grace, for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
I'm sure we'll have you back on at some point soon.
Thanks so much.
For more information on this podcast or other programs, please visit faithandfreedom.com.